Now, really quickly, up next we have a very interesting panel discussion, the most awaited session for me personally, because this is something to do with cybersecurity. Given the amount of digitization, working from home, obviously everything related to COVID, the whole, I think we should just name the summit as COVID-19, banking post-COVID-19. Anyway, the panel is called Digitization and the Risks That Come With It, the Need to Avoid, Address, and Fight Cyber Risks. And it is my pleasure to invite the moderator, Mr. Andy Akoto, who's the Head of Advisory and Partner, Risk Consulting Services, KPMG Ghana. And there is a list of panelists that involve Mr. Carl Amanor Saki, President, ISACA Accra Chapter, Mr. Daniel Aroromola, Chief Information Security Officer, Unity Bank, Michael Michi, Head of Information Technology, OK Law, Confidence Stavely, Founder and Executive Director, CyberSafe Foundation, also very fondly known as Nago for Mala, Daniel G. Adeyemo, Digital Transformation Advisor, Microsoft, and then we have Mr. Jim Sullivan. He is the Senior Vice President, Strategy and Compliance, Chief Legal Officer, BioKey International. Now, please request all the panelists to go live now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And it's a pleasure to join this very important summit. My name is Andrew Akoto from KPMG, as has already been introduced to our guests this morning. KPMG is proud to be associated with this program, seeing that, obviously the future is digital, and therefore we need to continue to remain very alert and in step with our clients to support them in all their digital journeys, and to make sure that they remain relevant also to the changing needs of their customers. As already been introduced, I'm honored to be in the midst of 6 eminent panelists, and that are going to help us deal with the topic at hand, which is digitization and the risks that come with it, the need to avoid, address, and fight cyber risk. So we're going to deal with this within the allotted time by fielding a few questions for our panelists to take on. And let's first of all also put it in context, because according to studies by Digisec and others, the threat of cyber risk, is gaining currency, especially in the midst of the pandemic and the virtual world that we are all have been thrust in. It's estimated that in Africa we're losing over $3.5 billion annually. Countries that are particularly affected are Nigeria, which is losing over $500 million annually, followed by Kenya and Tanzania. But then we have the likes of South Africa also grappling with the issue, incurring losses of over $150 million per annum. In Ghana, the National Cybersecurity Center has just put out some statistics. But over the past couple of years, we've lost also close to about $150 million. So listen, no one is safe. And the question is, how do we address this, and how do we make sure that we are very effective in addressing this threat? So to begin with, I want to be able to invite my first panelist, that is Confidence, who happens to be the only lady in our midst, to help us look at the kind of risk or cyber attack patterns or typologies that we are beginning to see with this increased digitization. Over to you, Confidence. And after Confidence, I'll have Mr. Daniel Adamorella also contribute to that particular question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akota. That question is very profound, especially in this day and time when we're seeing quite an increase in cyber attacks across the continent and across the world. But first of the many things I'll be highlighting as current risk would definitely be data theft. And while data has become the new oil, we've also seen that we have, with digitization, put tools in the hands of people open up marketplaces that were previously offline to become online, done quite a lot in terms of putting technology in people's hands. And while we have done that, we've collected a lot of data. But we've also done a lot of that to people not knowing their attendant risk, what the issues are around these things. And sometimes it can feel like giving my 5-year-old son my car to drive. While the car isn't a bad thing, but because the child is not yet ready and doesn't have the skills to deal with the risk of driving a car, it becomes a risk in itself for this child to have the car to drive. And that's sort of what we currently have as a very strong issue. And with this increased use of digitization also means increased collection of data. And where that data is stored, how it's processed, how it's transmitted, how it is stored, in what format, is it protected enough, has become a key issue. So this has been one of the key risks. We've had an increase of data theft issues from database misconfigurations. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, although it was not disclosed, I found out about a data breach that had to do with a Kibana misconfiguration for one of the e-commerce firms in Nigeria. And these are some of the things we are seeing increasingly in the landscape, where misconfiguration of databases is leading to a whole lot of data leakages, providing the raw materials that cyber criminals need to go about social engineering and all the other attacks that are possible from having data of consumers and customers that have trusted organizations with this data. So we're seeing quite a lot of increase in data theft from issues around unsecured databases and cloud applications generally. We're also seeing very sophisticated and not so sophisticated social engineering attacks. I mean, COVID-19, presented a very, very perfect backdrop, like the person who introduced this panel spoke about. Literally, there's been that perfect chaos, and that perfect background of chaos has created the perfect backdrop for cyber criminals to carry out all sorts of social engineering attacks. And while it goes from the generic COVID-19 materials and COVID-19 equipment, COVID-19 related equipment, we've had things like consent phishing, which has gone on and of course has increased quite a lot. We've had a lot of pretexting, and of course the general old tricks from the book, of cyber criminals continues to thrive. We've also seen malware infections, from fileless malware infections to the good old malware infections spread over unsecured networks, to phishing emails, to even smishing links in social media and generally platforms that people are using for communication. So we've seen quite a lot of that on the African landscape as it concerns cyber attacks. So I'm just going to stop here because I think there's quite a lot we can go on. But before I do, we've also seen some ransomware, quite a lot of ransomware attacks that have come from people leaving their networks open, not having good enough passwords, not using VPNs to communicate. Also, misconfigurations of legacy systems have also led to ransomware attacks. So we're seeing quite a lot of these, but very strongly, some of the biggest issues we have in Africa has remained social engineering and of course around misconfigurations and management of data.
Thank you so much, Confidence. We have Daniela Damorola, who is the CISO at Unity Bank. I'm sure you have something else to add to this. Daniel?
All right, Mr. Akoto, thank you so much for providing the context around the discussion. I think the figures you actually gave are quite, this speaks volume of the nature of risk that behoves the enterprise as we know it today. To a large extent, Confidence has given some, clarity in terms of the major risk. I think Confidence mentioned something around the risk to technical vulnerabilities, configuration management issues. And that really is one of the main risks that behoves on us today as industry professional. I belong to, as part of my day-to-day function as a CISO of a bank, I belong to a committee of CISOs in Nigeria. We call ourselves Committee of Chief Information Security Officers of Nigerian Financial Institution. Given the IT risks, there's so much we're doing from the area of collaboration and intelligence sharing. You recall, maybe some of us that, you're listening to the news, a couple of weeks back, during the NSAS agitation, there was some coordinated attack targeted at Nigerian financial institution. Most of these attacks actually reside around DDoS. The interesting thing about those attacks really is the perpetrators are, the name tagged to them, they are globally known. You're talking about the anonymous group or their affiliates. So, given this trend, we're seeing cases in which known hacking group that we've known them to be associated with attacks in the Western world, talking about Russia, talking about Romania, and things like that. We're seeing an influx of them coming into the sectors in Nigeria and also Africa. So that builds on us to be much more calculated, much more coordinated, come up with robust intelligence and way of defending the enterprise. So added towards confidence, as I mentioned, one of the key areas we are seeing in terms of pattern that leads to these vulnerabilities is the issue of what we consider as nth party risk. We call it third party, but from some of us CISO, we understand it goes beyond the third party. We call it nth party because a lot of times you could have a vendor come in, provide service for the enterprise. That vendor also outsources the service to another vendor, and that other vendor outsources the service to another vendor. So to a large extent, even though you have an SLA with the primary vendor, you're not exactly sure what the end vendor is doing. So that a lot of times provides backdoors and, to the enterprise because there's a trust relationship between the bank in this context and, the vendor. Of course, there are ways around this, rights to audits to the vendor providing some background in terms of compliance, also doing some assessment by independent third party. Those are very key, but with those controls, we're still seeing attack from that pivoting into the environment from that angle. In fact, today, some of the figures we are seeing in terms of gaps, figures in terms of fraud, may not be unconnected with that. There are so many figures to share from CBN, from the Apex Bank perspective, but some of those are confidential information. But with the nature of what we're seeing today, I quite submit that it calls for coordination, it calls for collaboration, it calls for, intelligence beyond what we've known so that we can be much more prepared. They say today is not about you being attacked, it's about the fact that you will be attacked, it's about resilience. So that's the game today. Business continuity and being resilient should you be attacked. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I believe, as we've all heard, the risks are legion, and there's a need to be a bit more alert, have intel and a collaborative approach to try and deal with the risk to our assets. We've seen data theft, we've heard about social engineering, phishing, malware, infections, ransomware, and also third-party or end-party risk, all of which are playing out in our offices and in our organizations, practically on a weekly or even daily basis. So, what kind of mitigation techniques or security controls are available to deal with these threats? And what kind of blind spots should we be mindful of? And to help us address this, I will have Michael come in and help us, get some information around this minutes. Thank you. Michael?
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So I think the first step where we would start off is you have to start off small and then build your way up. Of course, just probably start off with a few policies and procedures, do an inventory of your systems and also your data, find out where your data resides, who has access to that data. Once you've already built that, then you start looking at best practices. What are the best practices out there that you can adopt? Standards either from COBIT, ISO, NIST, CIS 20, and the likes. Then from there, of course, one key important thing, as you've just learned, that data is heavily targeted now, is working on a data lifecycle and building a data minimization plan. This is one key blind spot that we don't look at. We usually have this tendency to secure ourselves as a perimeter, but with the pandemic and everything going on, perimeters no longer exist. So without a proper data lifecycle map that shows how data moves within your organization, where it resides, who has access to that data, either to modify or view that data at a given point in its data lifecycle journey, how that data is transmitted to third parties, and we've also learned to end parties, that significantly also matters. Then, of course, minimization of data and principles such as design by subtraction, where you just limit the number of possible options that or attack vectors that are there. Do you need to have, so that this would lead to decisions like, or questions like, do you need to have certain data on the cloud? Do you even need to have certain data about your own clients? As much as data is the new oil, just how much data can you derive value from? And if the data has no value, sitting on a large chunk of unused data makes you again a soft target. From there, we can look at technologies which you could implement, such as data loss prevention, intrusion detection systems. And as far as we've seen within our market here in Kenya, we've seen the committee of bankers in cybersecurity try to come up with an industry SOC, that's a security operations center, that would obviously monitor the internet and certain channels for banks for any intrusions. So there is quite a lot to do. Other stakeholders, such as the board, need to be educated on a regular basis, either quarterly or biannually, where they are informed of the risks, the inherent risks within cybersecurity, and the value of protection of just let the risk happen, or the assumption that we don't feel like we're a big enough target. So that kind of education goes a long way into ensuring that you get that top-down support to build all these practices. The blind spots mostly come in my opinion, when we're looking at the skill gap. That is one key blind spot. We tend to focus on certifications of a skill, and maybe this is just part of the recruitment process, where by the time candidates are presented to either the CISO or the head of security, they have been weaned out in regards to certificates. But if you had this CISO head of security start off the actual recruitment process, they would obviously eliminate best of all skill. So I think that creates a disparity within the skill gap, and I think that is one area that needs to be addressed significantly well. Of course, the other area I mentioned is just the lack of data life cycles and data minimization once all these tools are built. The third, and probably also one of the biggest blind spots we see, is when we are integrating all these technologies, because there's no security solution or technology that is going to solve all your problems. So you have to integrate your DLP with a firewall, with your AD, with other different resources. So these integrations, of course, as technical as they are, sometimes we tend to do them a bit too fast and hurriedly, and we leave loopholes where APIs can be exploited because of poor credentials and the likes. So those are the key blind spots we'd watch out for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Getting this perspective from the Far East of Africa, if you can describe it like that, Nairobi. But let's cross continents and get to hear the perspectives from Jim. Jim, thank you for joining us from the US. I'm sure it's very early morning on your side. Perhaps there are certain perspectives that you can also bring to this question.
Yes, thank you, and it's great to be here. The it's interesting to hear the various points of view of what Confidence said and what Daniel said, and see that while there's so much of a focus on how data is to be identified and to protect and control the data that you're storing, that there is a fundamental problem that Daniel identified of the fact that if you're delegating tasks to a particular third-party individual, that they might in turn delegate it further and lose control of the intentions of what you had originally said. And this is an area that is kind of beyond hacking because it's really about unauthorized delegation. And the interesting thing is the two problems kind of meet in the middle in the fact that the FBI, for example, last year issued what they call a private industry notice cautioning against the idea of simply issuing an MFA solution and resulting in the fact that either through social engineering, as Confidence and Daniel both talked about, or through what I would call intentional delegation, account handoff, if you will, it allows potentially for a third party to socially engineer and get their way into your system. So even if you've done everything right and you've issued a credential to someone, they could possibly be unwittingly handing it over to someone else. So the FBI's recommendation in that case was that entities implement biometrics. It's really how we've gotten involved in the banking industry, because that problem of social engineering and phishing meets the problem of unauthorized delegation to be able to allow you to make an identity secure so that the individual is the only one who has access to it. But also when you're dealing with your third parties, that they are the ones that you're going to see accessing your systems and not someone that they handed off the credential or the app or the OTP token or whatever the technique of multi-factor. So it's important to see how all of these problems starts to stitch together and gives you the ability to really mitigate them with a technique like the FBI is recommending.
Interesting. Just stay with us, Jim, because as we've heard, these cyber criminals and, if you like, unscrupulous persons, their main focus is get access to your data, and make sure that they use that same data that you are using to enrich your insights and your decisions against you. So, I mean, what kind of, beyond all that we've had, putting in place technology, mechanism, data loss prevention systems, and so on and so forth, how are governments and nations actually rallying around this cause? I mean, we've heard of some cybercrime laws being passed in Ghana. We had one passed just last week, awaiting presidential assent. And then we are talking also about data protection measures, for which a number of jurisdictions, like the European GDPR and so on and so forth. I mean, are these measures enough and effective in the fight against cybercrime?
Well, I think that obviously the one that has gotten the most attention and upon which others are based is the GDPR. And if you think about what the takeaway for a company operating with personal data under GDPR is, that they're at great risk if they don't take the proper measures to protect that data, to implement adequate and appropriate security for the risk of the exposure of that data. There's a lot of focus on the right to consent to taking data. There's a lot of focus on how the data or whether it is able to leave a jurisdiction without consent and appropriate even data protection organization and agency approval. But what's missing is the idea that at the end of the day, you have to provide a user experience that is able to deliver the appropriate security and not have simply the focus be on how you can or cannot move data, but that component that's a little bit buried down inside of it, which is the integrity and security of the technology and processes that you're implementing. And again, from that third party point of view, you can have implemented multi-factor, which sounds on its face like you've met the requirements to appropriate security. But at the same time, there is the questions that get raised, like how do we prevent from unauthorized delegation? So there's so much of a focus in the data protection laws that exist around the privacy protections, which is very important, but they aren't really helping to define what is what I'll call a reasonable security defense for an entity that operates with technology. And what we hear from our customers is that the reason that they're trying to implement a technology like ours or another is that if you have the ability to tell a customer, I've allowed you to have a variety of security options to secure your account and data. Now it's up to you to choose which one is most appropriate for you. Then having offered a breadth of solutions and not simply saying that, you implemented an MFA with an SMS message or something that might be considered weak, that you've given them the option and now you're able to provide them with a convenient user experience, and you're not violating the reasonable security requirement, but you're also making it so that you're protecting against that sort of unauthorized delegation or account handover, which is really different from account takeover, but is solved in the same way because you need to have a way to make the identity sticky to the individual. So it really is where these data protection laws have given great protection and focus on privacy and consent, and a little bit more of a hand wave at how you're going to get to reasonable security, that we see that there's the challenge that needs to be defined. So right now, I and a group of lawyers in the United States are working within the Sedona Conference, which is one of the kind of think tanks of law creation in the United States and worldwide. And we're working on how to create integrity and components around some of these technologies that will allow there to be a reasonable standard that you can point to instead of simply having a battle of experts if there's litigation. So it's really all about making it so that there's a little bit more guidance beyond simply saying get consent, make sure that you have the right processing techniques and that you're not making decisions against people, as was the focus of the GDPR, but instead really focusing on, okay, what do I need to do at the point when I'm identifying someone, and what do I need to do to make sure that that's got a high integrity component to it and not subject to somebody handing off their credential and then pointing back to try to escape the liability of the fact that they had a multi-factor solution in place.
Very interesting. I guess we will have to come back to the region, go back to Nairobi, and pick some perspectives from Michael. But before Michael comes in, I just want to prompt the audience to fill any comments, contributions, questions in the questions box, so that at the end of the day, we can also play it back to our panelists to address them. Michael, what perspective do you have? What do you see in the African region? And are these legislations enough deterrent to prevent these miscreants from carrying on with their trade?
Thank you. I think you've just used the right word. These legislations are just a deterrent, because they're not just quite that simple to just implement. And one of the challenges we have of that implementation of this legislation is that most of the countries within Africa that have adopted such laws have copied heavily from GDPR and some had not taken into context sort of the cultural impact it has and how their society moves data and uses data. And so we have about 50% of all African countries, of course, do have some form of legislation in place. We have another 9 countries who have drafts, and the remaining ones either have no legislation or there's no available data as to if they have a legislation or not, or a draft. So it is something that's picking up in Africa. It's a good deterrent. It's a good way to ensure that the full extent of the law to these criminals is met whenever there's any punishment that is due. The immediate challenge that we would face with all this legislation, and one that we faced here in Nairobi, is that all the legislations covered a challenge of data protection focused towards the consumer. So when you're focusing on protecting the consumer, there are certain other industries and players who, because of the vagueness of this legislation, did not participate in the stakeholder agreements. Data scrapers, and we have this what we call the book of truth when you go into a building. So this requires you to surrender your certain personal information before accessing certain buildings, and that becomes a challenge for, of course, the legislation and how you'd go about implementing. So I think for further implementation would be required to have both lawyers and technical experts sit down, as well as industry stakeholders, to create a law that is conducive for all the industries within a given jurisdiction and allow them the opportunity to set standards and guidelines within. We've seen already banks had petitioned here locally in Kenya that their regulation to this act would be guided by information from the Central Bank of Kenya. So that's a good way to go about it.
Thank you so much, Michael, for those regional perspectives. Now, I think when you were making your presentation earlier on, you alluded to skill gaps, and I can't agree with you more because in the global CEO outlook that KPMG conducted at the beginning of the year in January, they identified certain top of mind issues and concerns that CEO had. At the time, the talent gap was sitting somewhere way down below. It wasn't even in the top 10. But because of the COVID and the impact of the pandemic, this survey, the CEO survey, had to be relooked at in June. And guess what? The talent gap came up on top of the CEO agitation agenda, if I can describe it like that. Because CEOs are worried. They know that the kind of situation in which organizations have been thrust requires that they're able to mobilize their best resources and skills to be able to address them, whether in the form of digital transformation or indeed in the form of security and information strength. But what we are finding out is that, there's a dearth of skills. And in fact, it's even projected that Africa currently will be lagging behind by way of over 100,000 positions in terms of ability to be able to respond. So let me bring in Carl, who sits as the president of ISACA chapter in Accra. And let me see what he has to say in terms of how we address these skill gaps. Do we just go by way of certifications, or what do we do to be able to respond to this challenge? Carl?
Okay, Andy, thank you very much. And yes, I think that the point you made about the skills gap is very important. Right now, the projection, and like you said, is big, 100,000 plus, and that's basically what we're looking at. Now, getting 100,000 people from the workplace is actually a very difficult ask, and we all have to look at it from that perspective. Businesses need to continue working. And so what we look at from ISACA's perspective is to have a multi-pronged approach where you look at partnering with a tertiary education institution, so like the universities, where you inculcate in their curriculum cybersecurity training. Basically, the essence of that is to be able to get people to come out of the university with cybersecurity background. And then after that, they can then look at the certification, which is more real hands-on type thing, and then help them to get into the workplace. That's the first thing. Second thing we also look at is the fact that, look, right now we still have to live with the skills gap, and you don't have all the professionals that you require. So businesses would definitely have to outsource some of the cybersecurity needs. And so you can go to these organizations, we call them like the white hackers, who can actually provide the companies with the support they require, whilst the companies provide the capacity themselves, get people trained, get certifications, and so forth. Certifications, are good. I believe in certifications, but I think that there is a lot more to certifications than just certifications, because you need a certification and then you need a hands-on experience. And that's why we advocate for this type of approach. And I think that when Daniel was making his point earlier on, he talked about the fact that from the hiring practices, you're not going to look only at just the certification, but you actually want to see exactly what the person is able to bring to fore to assess the person, not just purely on certificate, but get a person to do some hands-on type examination for the company. Now, the gap, like we said, it's a big thing, but beyond the professionals, it also goes to the fact that companies have a lot more to do than just getting cybersecurity professionals to work for them. Each and every individual in the organization has a role to play when it comes to cybersecurity. And the easiest and the easiest way to solve this problem is by simply improving awareness and education. If each and every member of staff actually goes through awareness training and the proper education, and this is done continuously, you have solved a big part of the problem. It doesn't mean that the technical problems are going to be solved, but the main things, so they don't fall for the social engineering tricks. Actually, you have reduced it to a very great extent. And that is one of the things which we found here in Ghana. Some work that we've done with some of the banks have proven that the awareness and education just to the ordinary member of staff has actually saved some of the financial institutions in Ghana big losses. So they've actually prevented this social engineering attacks from happening. And it's proven worldwide that it's one of the best things to do to solve the problem. And so, like I said, yes, we need education. We need to reform the educational institutions so that the cybersecurity and these practical things are inculcated in the curriculum. We need certification. You can't do away with it. We need to embrace outsiders, third-party organizations to help us. And then the most important one, get the people. Each and every member of staff is a cybersecurity advocate that we can improve education and we can give them awareness training and help them to help the organization to meet the challenge. And then the final thing, yes, you have the education, the gap, the skills gap issue, but also improve on automation and integration. So these are some of the things which I'd like to say for now, and I believe that we probably might have a few other things to add when we come back for other questions.
Just a quick one. I think initiative from individuals also matters. For example, what Confidence is doing in Nigeria is very laudable. From an individual perspective and partnering with other professionals like us, extending education through mentorship, through to the vast populace is actually very, very innovative. Those are strategic moves that should be encouraged. Thank you, Confidence, for what you're doing.
That's good. Yeah.
Interesting. This panel is getting hotter and hotter, and we are really getting to learn a lot. We need those alliances. We need those partnerships. We need to catch, the next generation of cyber professionals very early, perhaps even before university. And that is something that KPMG example does, where we have our Global Cyber Day. We try to reach out to even primary schools, and then just interact with them and engage them, because you are only as strong as your weakest link, and we are talking about people here. So I guess we really need to take your recommendations seriously, Carl. Those are very, very insightful, and the perspective that Daniel Daramola also brought was excellent. And I'm sure if Confidence is on the call, maybe since your name came up, you may want to educate us more about some of the things or initiatives you are doing in that space.
Thank you very much. So my organization is called CyberSafe Foundation, but one of our foremost initiatives is Noble for MAGA, where we are driving awareness about social engineering.
Sorry, I sort of Tony off. I've never heard him off like him like that. Ooh. Anyway.
About social engineering tactics used by cyber criminals. And we're just sharing education that affects the common person and just the average person on the streets to be able to protect themselves with the knowledge they gain. We're doing this with a mix of entertaining content and very exciting events that we put together. We recently launched a music video that drives awareness around the importance of two-factor authentication, phishing, but all in a way that allows people to dance and also learn. We're also doing something for SMEs. We're training 1,500 SMEs, employees of 1,500 SMEs. So we have two learning tracks. One is for the technical service providers within the organization, so say the IT personnel in that organization, and we're also upskilling the IT professionals in serving those SMEs, and we're also providing cybersecurity awareness training for the non-technical employees, so like the HR, the owner of the business, the salesperson. So that's what we're currently doing, amongst many other things. So thank you very much, Daniel, for mentioning that the work we're doing in Nigeria.
Fantastic, and very innovative. And I guess all of us have a thing or two to learn from that. Having said that, if we are looking at the future and some of the initiatives that we can be looking at, we cannot be looking too far from Microsoft. And thankfully, we have on our panel the Digital Transformation Officer or Advisor for Microsoft, Daniel Adeyemo. And I'm sure he will be able to do justice in terms of some of the things that we can anticipate in terms of future technologies and initiatives to this threat. Daniel?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Sure. Go ahead.
Fantastic. So thanks for that. So a lot of the things that you can do in the future have been mentioned. The challenge, obviously, has been very well described. It's not going to decrease, and with the acceleration of number of devices being connected to the internet, number of the perimeters coming down, like I believe somebody mentioned earlier, that problem is going to keep increasing. And so one of the key areas that we think, at least certainly in our strategy in handling security, that we think is key to being able to keep in the area of artificial intelligence, using AI to combat security. Because what happens is, just generally speaking, what happens, there is so much data and there's so much information that security systems and administrators have to process, and it's becoming less and less humanly possible for an individual to process. So, there's a bit of interference in the background, but I'll try to talk over it. So anyway, the use of artificial intelligence in managing security will become very key. Obviously, that requires skilling as well. That requires knowledge transfer. And those are the things that a lot of other people have already mentioned. We're working with a lot of our customers to come up with skilling plans, for example. This is very key. And so if you're a CISO or you're an organization and you're concerned about security, you need to make sure that you have a skilling plan that not just trains or skills your administrators and your security staff, but the entire organization, including your partner organizations. Because like somebody mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot of situations where, you have all of your security processes and employees well-trained, but you're tightly integrated with another partner who doesn't. And the attacks have come in through that method. And the intent of the attack is actually higher up the food chain, which is you, but they know that your partners are not well trained and they're tightly integrated. So having a skilling plan that really looks at your whole entire chain is very important as well. And then the last thing I want to mention has already also been mentioned, is the use of biometrics in addition to your two-factor authentication practices that we use today. The use of biometrics is very key and very important as well. So those are some of the future things that we can apply towards the protection of security in the future. A lot of the others have already been learned, but those three I want to emphasize: AI, making sure that your skilling plans and your training is up to date and covers the entire food chain, and then the use of biometrics.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm sure we have some audience. I'm not able to see them where I am, but hi, I think we have questions from the audience and our panelists. Gillian or Mohammed, can you help us with them?
Mr. Akoto, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So we have received questions from the audience. The first one is specifically, the question says, question for Carl. Yeah. This is from Mr. Francis Aqua. And the question for Carl is, are there specific statistics on how much institutions have saved as a result of implementing awareness among their employees? So let me repeat that for you. Are there any specific statistics on how much institutions have saved as a result of implementing awareness among their employees?
Okay, yes, let me just try to answer that. Yes, there's been a survey, a couple of surveys have been done, which have actually shown that organizations have saved, money because of awareness trainings. And I think that if you look at all the cybersecurity reports, this is one of the things that features on it. Off the top of my head, I don't have it, but I know that this report is available.
Wonderful. So I believe Mr. Carl Amanorsaki has been able to answer the question, Francis. You look for the report, and so will I do. I'm sure somewhere in Google in the world we will find it. Now, the next question is, again, it's not directed towards a specific panelist. However, the question is, what specific steps should we take to address the issue of skill gaps in order to address the issue of cyber-related threats. The question again is, what specific steps should we take to address the issue of skill gaps in order to address the issue of cyber-related threats?
Interesting question. I don't know which of my panelists will step up to the plate,
yeah,
but clearly,
could I try that? Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
Wow,
Confidence
that's interesting.
first.
Everybody wants to answer that.
Yeah, I think internship is a very good way to go about this. We could have some of those enthusiasts, people who you can open up opportunities to people, because some people might have skill and might not have the right attitude towards work. What internship would allow you to do is be able to see both sides and be able to hone the skill side of things before you get them into the workplace. And at that point also, certifications and the need for it can be something that can be supported within your organization while you have found that person worthy of your time and mentorship within the organization. So I feel short internships are a very great way to address the skills gap and also gender issues with the cybersecurity workforce.
Okay, you had a point, Daniel Ademo?
Yes, I wanted to mention that also making sure that you have the right partnerships with security organizations or vendor partners. One of the trends that we, from talking to customers in the region, and this is pretty much global last year, is because of the skill gap. What's been happening is, as organizations are taking in new trainees, new people, training them, as soon as they get trained and certified, they're now more appealing to competitors or other organizations. They get an offer for more money, they move on, you're left holding the bag, now you have to start all over again. And so that was a very frustrating, situation that we saw with a lot of CISOs and CIOs and CEOs that we talked to. And one of the approaches to addressing that is to make sure that you build loyalty in your employee with lots of different incentives. So it's not just bringing them in and training them, but also making sure that from an employee standpoint, this employee is loyal to the organization, has a good future. They see a future within the organization. There's a career path defined, and so on and so forth. So the problem is actually bigger than just bringing people in and training them, because otherwise you're just creating a factory of trainees for your competitors. And you have to look at that whole value chain and make sure that that's happening as well. So having a secondary partnership with another organization, so that in those emergency situations when you're hacked and you need somebody to come in and help figure out what's wrong and configure things, is also very key while we're going through this skills gap, which is going to be around for a little while until everybody gets up to speed.
Thank you, Daniel. I think our time is up. Unfortunately, we are not able to take all the questions and contributions from the audience, but I'm sure there will be a way to pick them later and then play it back. But I want to thank all my panelists who have more than exceeded my expectations this morning. We have very, very insightful views to the risk and the threats that are facing us as an organization and even as a society. Due to the risk imposed by cyber crimes and cyber threats, that we're confronting. Having said that, clearly there is a need for alliances, there is a need for partnership. I don't think organizations are addressing these issues effectively, especially even the smaller organizations. I mean, if we learn that on the average, organizations across the region are spending less than, on the average, $1,500 per annum, then you can see the kind of issues that we're dealing with. Do they see that spend, the value addition to protecting their assets, or they just see it as a cost? And these are the challenges that will continue to face us. And as we've all said, we need education. We need mentorship. We need training. But more importantly, we need to be innovative in this space to be able. Thank you so much. And I hand over back to the audience and the auditorium. Thank you. Ahmed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to personally thank you all, especially Mr. Andy Akoto, for moderating and driving the panel and being very, very cooperative from day one, and being available, because everybody in this panel, is of a huge responsibility within their individual organizations. So I would like to thank you for, taking time of your busy schedules and bringing in the knowledge and the level of content you have poured in today. So we will definitely catch up. What I will also be doing is I will be individually taking these questions that were addressed to the panel, and we will be sharing it on the groups that we've made, and reverting back with the questions, with the answers to people who've addressed these questions with. So thank you again. It was an absolute pleasure, having you all. We will connect soon. If it's any bonus, I must tell you, our organization is soon going to be hosting something called DigiSec 2021. So all you security leaders are welcome to be with me. Yeah, thank you. Now, moving on for the day. I know it's gotten a lot to process. So let's just process the information we've received. And I'd like you all to go look at the sun for 10 minutes, probably just grab a quick bite, drink something, but make sure let's get back to getting glued to our screens in exactly 10 minutes from now. We've already running short of time, so let's keep 10 minutes, guys. So thank you for your time. I will see you on the other side.